Hey everybody, this is Kit from Kit's Cars. So Aston Martin was kind enough to invite me to come drive the DBS Superleggera, and I was pretty excited about this. One of the things that I really want in my next car is a big old V12. I love the way the V12 engines sound, the smooth power delivery, and just the high RPM scream that they can make. I've owned a V10 and several V8 powered cars, but not owned something with a V12 yet. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Aston Martin decided that during Car Week, they would invite me out to drive a DBS V12. The DBS V12 is a 715 horsepower twin turbo V12 in a roughly 4,100 pound GT coupe. And I was pretty excited about driving this car because it checks just all the boxes for my next car. It was a big, comfortable car with 4 seats and a big motor. So was pretty excited to drive it. Was a little bit let down. It certainly had great first impressions. It sounded fantastic once I started the car up. It was easy to drive. The transmission was smooth. The controls were laid out. First thing I noticed though was that the cabin just doesn't give you the same sense of occasion as some of the modern Ferrari products. And the Aston Martin was nice, but just didn't have that same well thought out craftsmanship. And maybe the demonstrator model that I had just didn't have the nicer interior bits. But I was a little let down by the design of the interior. There are a lot of sort of strange shapes and spaces in it. The instruments were a little bit hard to read, and the squared off steering wheel with thin spokes just didn't really jive with me. But once we started moving, I kind of understood the controls and started to like the car a little bit more. After you sort of get used to the huge amount of thrust this car can produce, you do start to realize that what doesn't work as well for me is that the car feels just a little artificial, like the experience is curated a little too much for my benefit. The first few minutes you drive it makes all the right noises, it handles decently, it's comfortable, it's very composed, it hides the weight well. The motor sounds fantastic when you're on it, and it makes pops and bangs when you back off the throttle. But after you get over the initial surge of acceleration, you start to realize that it just doesn't feel like a good naturally aspirated motor, and the experiences of being somewhat disconnected to the engine. There's a half a beat of delay when you roll into the throttle. There is just not quite the right sounds that come out of it, especially with the windows up, and I'll show that a little bit later. As with many GT cars, the steering is a little bit lifeless to hide the bulk of the car. It's quick and responds well, but you just feel disconnected from the whole driving experience. Don't don't get me wrong, there's a lot to really like about this car. The power is really intoxicating, and it does make a ton of it, and it builds nice and progressively, which is makes it fun to drive. The steering and brakes, though, it really does feel more sedan-like with a really quick rack than it does a sports car. And then we got stuck behind a garbage truck, so I'll fast forward for a few minutes. Like I said, there's a lot to love in this car. It's fast, it handles really well on these broad turns, it's very composed, the turn-in is decent, but I really think Ferrari does a much better job of connecting the driver to the road, although I felt a lot of the same problems with the Portofino M and the Ferrari Roma, that the motor experience is just a little too curated for me. Makes me really miss some of the naturally aspirated motors, such as in the 812 Superfast and the GT4C Lusso and F12.
That road just looked pretty good this afternoon.
Yeah.
Looks like it was pretty clogged up.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely lost traction at the top of second gear there, so car's definitely got a lot of power, and it sounds pretty good doing it. So but can't complain too much about the sound outside the car. Inside the car, the sound is a little fake sounding, and listen to what it sounds like when I put the window up. It just takes on this slightly tinny and a little bit fake sounding engine note from inside, probably because the cabin is so well insulated and the car cruises quietly, but it just doesn't sound nearly as inspiring as it did with the window down. Yeah, I was really torn on this car. On one hand, it makes great noises with the window down, and if you're full on the gas, it sounds pretty awesome. It doesn't rev quite as high as most naturally aspirated motors, and it just has this little bit of delay that in responding to the throttle that I just don't really enjoy. And I'm being really nitpicky here because for someone driving someone else's car, I certainly had a good time, but I gotta say that it'd be tough for me to spend $400,000 on this car and just not have it be as exciting as I want to. I really wanted this car to drive like a better looking Ferrari FF or GT4C Lusso, but it doesn't. It drives like it's sort of disconnected from the whole experience, that it's good at wide open throttle and it's good at cruise, and transitioning between them makes it just a little bit grumpy. Driving it at 7/10 because it was someone else's car was okay, but I had a lot more fun in my own Spider, and yeah, this just wasn't the right car for me.